Good evening. Tonight we're going to look at the rise of the Western European kingdoms and the development of their cultures. So, the learning objectives that we're going to focus on today are listed here. As I said before with other video lectures, if you want to take a moment and look at these now, or if you would care to take a look at these once we are finished to see how they fit it would be a good idea, especially to get a better understanding of what we need to focus on. And the unit concepts, key concepts that we're going to focus on tonight are listed. We're especially going to look at the development of state building and also the economic trade networks that develop and change as these kingdoms develop and these cultures develop. So starting off, we're going to look at the fall. We'll start at the fall of Western Rome and this European invasion. Now, this area of Europe was kind of considered a last frontier and kind of a backwoods area made up of many different tribes. And then when Rome falls, you have the influx of these many different groups. So you have the Vikings coming in, as we looked at when we talked about the Russians, the development of Russia. You have the Hungarians spreading. You have the Muslim invasion that comes in and spreads during the Umayyad. And then you have the many other Frankish, Germanic tribes that are spreading throughout. So the question to ask is what would be both the positive and negative effects of these constant invasions and the contact within Western Europe and how that would impact the development of these kingdoms and cultures. Some of the invaders, as highlighted, you have the Muslim movement. They've taken, as we looked at with the Umayyads, they moved through North Africa on into Sicily and Spain. You have Spain especially being the center of Islamic culture in Europe. Cordoba becomes the city of lights, highly advanced. You have the Magyars, which again help establish Hungary. And then you have the Vikings, who are just moving into the coastal areas, and really any river that can support their shallow boats. They're being the spreaders and carriers of civilization in this area. So beginning with the Germanic tribes. So again, Western Europe was kind of a frontier backwoods area. So life in a tribe was what we would see when we looked at, especially from Unit 1, where you have these nomadic groups. So highly nomadic, oral culture. The leaders of these tribes are normally the strongest fighters, or the people that could provide his people with more. As we talked about, the big man, as Standage highlights in his Edible History. And one of those tribes that comes to the forefront are the Franks, led by a man named Clovis. He helps define the Franks. They establish themselves in the former Roman province of Gaul, and he establishes Paris as his capital city. Now, Clovis converts to Christianity because he marries a saint. It doesn't hurt to marry a saint, Saint Clotilda. And he then is baptized on Christmas Eve. And with that, then becomes an ally with Rome, especially the Western, what was left of the Western Rome. So here's Gaul, the area that he takes over and establishes himself. And then this is a artist rendition of Clovis being baptized, and this is a quote uh, by Clovis during his baptism. O God of Clotilda, help me in this my hour of need. If thou wilt give me victory, now I will believe in thee. Again, making that connection back to God, and by converting, he then converts his followers and spreads Christianity, and Catholicism becomes um, the kingdom's religion. Uh, so the question, why convert his people to Christianity? What would be significant of a leader converting and then causing his people to convert? Something to think about. Uh, so this then leads to the epic battle of Tours in 732, led by Charles Martel, or aka Charles the Hammer. He leads the Frankish forces against the Muslim Umayyad forces that are coming out of Spain. This is a victory, and this is seen as that first instance or struggle between Christianity and Islam. But the lower class people did not see it that way. Many of them saw this as an opportunity to meet and trade with the Muslims in the area because they're still there. So it's hostile because there's always that threat of, again, an invasion. But the Muslims in Spain bring in these new technologies and ideas that are spreading throughout the Muslim world, Dar al-Islam. So this is that connection or influence that the Muslims have in Western Europe, although the Christian kingdoms don't really see it as an opportunity to trade just yet. And then Charles, his grandson, then takes the lead. Charlemagne. Charlemagne lives up to the family name as stated. He is the son of Pepin the Short, grandson of Charles Martel. You can kind of get an idea of where Pepin gets his nickname from. Charlemagne is confrontational from the beginning. He spends many of his early years fighting and trying to solidify his power among the Franks. But he is able to do so. And with that, he then is crowned king by Pope Leo III on, again, Christmas Day. With this, he then unifies a Christian community. He is the leader of that. It also is significant with the crowning of Charlemagne by the Pope, because the Pope now, it shows that God is giving him power. Again, think about when was last time or where in history we've talked about the connection between the leader and God, or the gods. So Charlemagne is kind of living or carrying on that tradition. But the uniting or the conversion and crowning by the Pope, it also splits the empire. Something to think about. Why would that have an impact if you have the Pope crowning your king? Now, Charlemagne establishes a new form of government. He has nobles below him that he then gives land to. Again, think of the last time we've talked about how a ruler establishes power by giving land away. He also has a group called the Missi Dominici, which are officials that roamed the countryside to maintain order. Again, where have we heard something like this before? And then he establishes a school called the Eleusinian, which is based on Latin teachings and Latin learning. So trying to carry on that Roman traditions. When Charlemagne passes away, he does not leave a solid heir to the throne. Again, think of where we've heard that before, where someone creates a large empire but then fails to name that heir. And because of that, you have the Treaty of Verdun and the division of Charlemagne's empire. You have um, Charlemagne's three grandsons that then divvy up the empire. You have Charles II, or Charles the Bald. Again, you can just guess how he got his nickname. He helps establish what ends up becoming France. Lothair the First, who maintains power over the central portion and on into Italy and up into the Netherlands. And last but not least, Louis II, or Louis the German. He helps bring about the creation of the what would then be later the Holy Roman Empire. But all three of these men maintain connections with the Catholic Church and are seen as the defenders of the Church. So Charlemagne helps establish a new culture, which is German, Roman, and Christian. I hope you're making a connection. I hope this sounds very similar, because there was another leader within history that sounds eerily similar to his, especially with his legacy. But Charlemagne's legacy is just that. It's that establishment of that new culture. His empire falls pretty quickly, but it's that connection now. That's why the rulers within these areas are all crowned by the Pope in a ceremony similar to Charlemagne's ceremony. Charlemagne, and really within this area, you have the establishment of what is called the feudal system. The feudal system is a obligation and agreement system between a lord and his vassals. Some unique structures. This is the power structure with the king at the top. Again, think about where we've seen something like this before. But medieval life in the feudal system carries its own unique culture and manner. So this is just a highlight, and we're not going to go through all of these, but some of the important terms used. So you have during this obligation, you have what's called a feudal contract, where a lord and vassal make an agreement. The lord gives the vassal a fief, or a portion of land, and then offers protection, and the vassal then provides loyalty, 40 days military service, and taxes. So it's that mutual agreement between the lord and the vassal. Again, over here, you can kind of see the social structure. Liege lord is when a vassal pledges his first allegiance to a lord. What would happen is you'd have vassals who were nobles that would pledge their allegiance to many lords in order to gain more land, because every time you pledged allegiance, you got a portion of land. So a lot of times you had vassals that had more land than their lords. But the problem was when war broke out, you had to go and fight for your lord. So if you had two lords that were fighting against one another, you were torn. So the establishment of a liege lord, or your first allegiance lord, you would then go fight on his side, and you may have to fight against your other lord. You also have the establishment of knights. Knights were the warrior class. They're the most famous of the Middle Ages, as you well know. They were provided an education. They were taught in the ways of chivalry. They were dubbed by the royal family or their lord. They were dubbed in a ceremony that is equivalent to what is seen now with being dubbed knights in modern day. The Catholic Church takes this idea and uses it during a ceremony which is called making your confirmation. So when you enter into the church, you become a defender of the church, and you are dubbed by the bishop in your area. So the Catholic Church takes this idea of dubbing a knight. And then you also have tournaments, which are the famous ones. We'll look at these a little bit later. And then the role of women during feudalism, very unique and very important. Noble women, uh, as we've seen before, the higher up in society you go, really the more restrictive it is on women. So women did not have a whole lot of rights outside of the manor. They were stuck to the manor, running what was going on around the manor. Um, she would have ladies in waiting that would help her dress, help her go through her day. Um, she really didn't have a whole lot to do around. She wasn't really taught any ways of in any form of formal education. She was more taught practical things like weaving or just little things to keep busy. So noble women were expected to carry themselves in a certain to a certain standard, but they weren't expected to do much. And then finally, melee, or one of the more important forms of melee. As you can see, the melee right here. But this is not the melee that we're talking about when we talk about a melee. This is more of that. So melee is basically like a pickup game of warriors fighting, because knights really didn't have a whole lot to do. They just sat around waiting, but they were trained fighters. So what ended up happening was you would then have a melee where knights, two opposing forces, would choose to meet on a field of battle to put their skills to the test. This is outside of tournaments. And a lot of the times you would have knights being killed in these melees, which then caused these sort of impromptu fighting to be outlawed by many of the monarchs and also the Catholic Church, because you don't want to see two Catholics killing one another. You don't need to have a loss in that population. But melees were ways of knights kind of showing off their power until tournaments then come up. This is a famous example. I put this is on the PowerPoint that's on Haiku. If you want to take a moment and just watch it, it is the Black Knight. One of the myths of medieval times was the Black Knight, who was considered invincible and undefeated. And Monty Python then takes it to a whole nother level. So if you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend watching it. This is the breakdown of medieval life and the social structure. And again, what was expected. So that relationship. So basically, flowing of loyalty and goods go up, where you then have protection, shelter going down. So you could see that connection between the many levels of groups within society. And just like we've looked at before, it is almost like a pyramid structure. The lowest class is normally the largest, and that lowest class in medieval European life were the serfs or the peasants that were tied to the land. Another symbol of medieval culture were castles. These are examples of castles within the different major kingdoms. And I want you to take a moment and look at the styles and how they are similar yet unique to their area. Each castle had the same type of elements. So the breakdown of a castle, you would have the turrets, which had a 360 degrees. It was all for defense. You had the keep, which was the last line of defense. It later becomes the living quarters of the noble family in the castle. So this is when the walls are breached. Everyone would run to the keep. You had a curtain wall, normally made of wood and then later of stone, to protect against the siege. You had a bailey, which was a market area. This is that open green space. During a siege, it would be the living areas, because you would then pull all of the people in the surrounding area. Your peasants would come into the bailey and live. You had these flanking towers, which had windows that could see in a sight of 180 degrees. These were mainly used by archers for defense. And then you did have a well, which was a water source at the time, but it could also be could also be used as a target for contamination by opposing forces. If you could poison the well, you had a good chance at ending the siege. And then, last but not least, you have the drawbridge that controlled who can go in and out. You did also have an outside kitchen, which I forgot to highlight, but that's kind of self-explanatory. Hopefully you understand what that is. So, as you could see, the whole purpose of a castle was for protection, and because of that, that tells a lot about the culture of this of medieval life. It was constant warfare, constantly under threat of attack, and siege warfare becomes a major form during this time. It was they did meet out on a pitched battlefield, but a lot of times when invaders came in, it was for siege purposes. And the Vikings were the most famous of this. The Vikings have a heavy impact on the establishment of the feudal system and castles, because they would rip through very quickly and lay siege to a town very quickly. So that helps with the establishment of this and development of this culture. So again, manners. You can go through and look at this. The manor life. You had the lords of the estates. You could have one or more villages and serfs that worked it. They were very self-sufficient. And again, you had that mutual agreement. The life of a peasant was pretty harsh. It started just before sunrise and didn't end until much after sunset. And you pretty much worked the whole time, every single day of your life, except for Sundays, because Sundays was to go to church. So you would have that time off on Sunday, that free time to go to church and be part of your community. And the last little thing we're going to look at is the economic expansion and change. These are three questions that we want to take into account as we are going through. So how did new technologies spark the agricultural revolution? How did the agricultural revolution and the revival of trade revolutionize commerce? And then how did the guilds link the rise of towns and cities? So you needed an agricultural revolution in order to have an industrial revolution or an economic revolution. So the agricultural revolution is started by the institution of new technology, such as the iron plow, harnesses, the three-field system, and windmills. Again, making connection back, where have we seen, especially these two instances of, or these two technologies before, because this is not the first time that they've been used, but this is now the first time that they've made it to Western Europe. But because of this, you have an increase in food production, and then because of that, you then have a population explosion. And because of the population increase, you have a need for goods that were not available at the time. You have these massive trading routes that are coming up. I want you to take a moment and take a look at these and also see where they're also connecting in, where it's this similarity that we've seen before, and where are they connecting to previous trading sites. And then you also have, during this time, you have a decrease in foreign invasion and feudal warfare, so that then allows for trade to increase. So almost like, again, a little piece that allows for people to move freely, trade ideas freely. And this is just an artist's rendition of what a market, medieval market would look like. You have many different vendors, many groups of people coming in. You could tell the status of society by the way that they dressed. You have entertainment. You also have beggars on the street. So you could walk through the market and come in contact with many different groups. So a revival in trade led to a revolution in commerce. So you then have these new ideas that are coming in, and I say new in that way, quote unquote, because they borrow ideas from other people. Again, I'm not going to tell you, but you should know where these ideas came from or who used these before. But you have the establishment of banks. So now you don't have to, you can put your money into that bank. Now with Christianity, they outlawed they outlawed Christians being bankers. So that then opens the door for non-Christians, such as Jews, to be money lenders within the society and bankers within the society, which again plays a role later on. You have the establishment of partnerships, you have the idea of insurance, and then you have the adoption of what's called a bill of exchange. So you don't have to carry around all of your money. You can have a bill that represents that money. So think about where we've heard that before. And this is just a little trader that would be walking around making his trades, just like that little guy right there. There he goes. These traders would walk from town to town and bring their ideas, bring their goods, and tell of where they're coming from. So this then connects those people in. So last thing we'll look at is now the social change. So because of that commercial revolution, you now have the shaping of not only the economy but also society. You have tenant farmers now being used instead of serfs. So so now you had people that were hired to work the land instead of being stuck on the land. You now have the establishment of a middle class system, or middle class, and these are now the merchants, traders, and artisans that are making money off of their trade and off of their goods. As stated, you have the church forbidding Christians to be moneylenders. So now you have Jews who are barred from many other professions. They're now taking up that role, which then leads to later on persecutions and prejudices against those Jews. But at the same time, they now have that role within society, a defined role within society. And then you have guilds popping up, or early unions. So you have workers that of all of the same type of guild or work coming together to form guilds for their own protection, the protection of their work, the protection of their wages. And they have influence within politics. So that it's almost the formation of early political parties by guild. So this change within feudal society, especially within the economy, has a massive impact on the culture and the development of that society. So as I stated before, go back and look at the learning objectives, see how these fit in, and then tomorrow we're going to take a moment and look at how these connections could be made, or where they may have borrowed these ideas, or what would then be the impact of these new kingdoms or the establishment of the feudal society, medieval feudal society, and maybe look at a comparison to other societies at the time. Have a great night.